Hey there, YouTube. Welcome to Big Mike Beard Wisdom. So today, we've really been trying to fix a whole bunch of stuff. So up here in Minnesota, snow melts pretty quickly at times and stuff, and we had quite a lot of rain, and then about 4 more inches of snow, and then it's like a 56-degree day. So it goes without saying, some water got into places, and luckily, the majority of my basement's fine. The back room, though, whole different story. And the basement's actually really kind of weird how it's set up. So underneath the kitchen, there's this funny little cutout in my wall. And if you look, we got some standing water. And the old sump pump. The first thing that I did was made sure that the sump pump was working properly. And my rear sump pump just feeds over to the basin where my front sump pump is. We had no water flow up there. So essentially I was like, okay, something's not right with the sump pump. And I went and checked out this right here. So this is where the extension cord that the previous owners and stuff ran for that rear sump pump. And what happened was that this reset button on the GFCI was triggered. It wasn't until I backed this up just a little bit that all of a sudden the button popped out. So luckily, even if that button's kind of pushed in a little bit, it still works as a proper GFCI and cuts power. So power was cut to it. I reset the button, plugged her back in, and then it was off the races as that rear pump kicked off and started blowing water. Which brought me back to the front sump pump basin area. And the crazy thing is that float down there wasn't acting the way it should be. So I had to use the green hose to kind of hook it, get it to stand up more vertical, and actually trigger the sump pump. Then, bad news happened. So, essentially, as the water came up the pipe, this drains out of the house right there, and then there's a cap I can pull to launch it just like straight out in the yard. Otherwise, it drops back down into the yard, underground, over to the curb. And the issue was that with that cap in there, that way it doesn't just spray out in the middle of the yard, it seems like somewhere in the yard to the curb must be frozen or broken over the winter and stuff. So all the water that this pumped out immediately came right back in. Going outside, I pulled this cap out. Pretty simple stuff, nice and easy. Was barely in there, like finger tight. So easy peasy stuff. Now, what I was thinking was that, hey, I really need to have a nice system because just launching water out that pipe isn't a great idea. So that rear pump was running the whole time, filled this up pretty good, and then I was able to manually operate the float in order to keep the water pushing back out. Then I just took and zip tied the float in place because like where the little screw clamp that goes down on the pump down there attaches, that's rusted out and long gone. So right now, haven't been able to actually do a final check on here because once I got that zip tied into place, lo and behold, that rear pump decided to stop working. So gotta get the big old waterproof boots out for this one. All right. So the way the house is kind of designed is kind of weird. So this sump pump here is in this 5-gallon bucket that's just kind of like knocked out over here. So, and then you can see this switch here was held down with just a bit of chain to weight it. So kind of an interesting arrangement. But basically the pump started to like really pumping slowly. And I was like, oh man, I'm like, I wonder what's going on. So what I think is that some of that weirdness that's down there got into the pump. So looking at the pump here, you can kind of see there's grit right there. And I'm wondering if this froze a little bit over the winter, separated just a touch. Now this might be serviceable, but I wanted to make sure I was all good to go and went and got a new pump. Meanwhile, I've noticed that this isn't in the best of shape. And when I took the hose off there, the hose just broke. So we've got a new hose. Well, a repurposed hose from outside that I brought in that we'll be using from down here from now on. And a brand new pump. So here's the pump. There's the repurposed hose. There's my fun and exciting fitting. So let's get into that. So one of the cheapest pumps that I know was around is Harbor Freight's sump pumps they have. And the crazy thing is that everybody and their brother is probably the same boat as far as that goes. So people are probably replacing their sump pumps like crazy because this was the last one available. And it's like the cheap one. So hopefully it still works out pretty good. It has a built-in float sensor. So just like the other two float sensors and stuff like that, when that goes up, it should trigger power to go through. The weird part is that this is built into the pump as opposed to being a separate unit. So a little bit more user-friendly as far as that goes. Just one simple plug-in. A little bit more of a pain in the butt in case there's a failure in that switch. And then the nice thing about this is that this uses a 1.5-inch threaded NPT discharge. And our good friend the plug outside is likewise 1.5-inch NPT. So what I did was I went and I picked up two 1.5 NPT adapters. And then another adapter to adapt the 1.5-inch down to 3/4 inch. And then I picked up fittings, both of them for hoses. So essentially, this one's going outside. That way, if I run in this situation again, instead of just removing this, having it launch right out in the yard, I can screw this in, have a hose on it. That way it's relatively controlled. This is probably going to be really interesting when this fires off without a hose on it, because I wonder, with it stepped down like that, if it's going to just rocket out. And then this is the exact same arrangement that I use on the sump pump, so we should be all good to go. The sump pump is all set up with some tape, thread sealant stuff, in order to help make sure everything's all good to go as far as that goes. And then for using the actual bonding of the pipes, I just use OD products. So these worked out pretty good. It's been a while since I've mixed these up and actually done something like this. So not the prettiest of jobs, but pretty freaking solid looking. And then of course you want to let this sit for about 2 hours at, like, you know, normal room temperature. That way it's all as strong as possible. So real quick, let's go ahead and screw this in outside with a hose. Here we are outside. You can kind of see the water launches out of here and kind of has been hitting this area here, which I don't really want it hitting there. The landscaping stuff stops somewhere over there with all the gravel. So this is still kind of landing close to the house. Whether or not that's going to be getting into the house, I don't know. But the other thing is that, as you can hear, the birds are back. So I don't want any birds bouncing in here instead of doing anything weird, or any mice getting in. So we'll just screw this in. And granted, a mouse or, you know, something else can try and squeeze into this hose, but I'm pretty sure that we should be good to go with this as far as any like birds or any seriously good sized stuff, hopefully. And worst comes to worst, if something does wind up making it in, I'm hoping that it'll be able to launch itself out if we ever trigger the sump pump and the rest of the 1.5-inch pipe. And then let's talk about this Drummond submersible pump real quick. It's kind of one of those things. In the instructions, it tells you that it's pretty simple. So it's just a 120 volt GFI protected socket, and then make sure it's secure. The other thing is that the pump is designed to pump water only, so probably not a, you know, soft materials one too. And it says the pump is designed for removing groundwater from basements and crawl spaces. It's not designed to be continuously ran for like ponds and stuff like that. So, but the pump can also be used to transfer water. It says household farming and plumbing. Gives you a pretty good breakdown of how you should have stuff set up. For me, it's not going to quite be about what it's supposed to be, but we should be kind of close. Then the interesting thing is actually about quarterly maintenance, which I had never known that you're supposed to do quarterly maintenance to sump pumps. I kind of figured they're just down there and that's it. So this will be something I'll have to do later. It's essentially just pull it back up, take the screws off the bottom, clean out that bottom area, and then screw it back together, and away we go. Real quick, let's talk about how the old pump's set up. The old pump, you've got the pump that actually is in the bottom plug-in area. This middle plug-in area is the switch. So when the switch floats up, it triggers power to be flowed through this little area here and power the pump. Then when the switch sinks back down, it disconnects power, shuts the pump off. Pretty simple. With the new unit, that's all built into the top of the pump, so only one plug-in. New unit's plugged in. We're in a fair amount of water right here, so you can kind of see how far up it goes. And hopefully I've got the hose where it belongs, but real quick what we'll do is we'll test this little sensor switch. That works. Looks like we're pumping water. Let that back down. So this seems pretty dry around it. So I would say that we're pretty much good to go as far as that fitting. So I'm just gonna let this kind of sit on top of there like that. We'll go check it out. Some of the hose has some kind of like tight spots. But from the sound of it, sounds like we're moving water pretty good. Yep. Then this will be the first time we can actually kind of test the float in here. Whoa. To make sure that float lifts up enough and triggers the pump. So right now, a little worried because this isn't moving up enough. So we'll just bump it. That one's running. You can see it's spraying outside, so not as crazy as I was thinking. So it's not launching it way out in the middle of the yard or anything. So we should be good as far as that goes. That looks like it shut off fairly early, so it got back to like almost like a horizontal state, not actually like a dip down vertical state. So some tweaking is going to be needed there. And this has been running the whole time. Seems to be doing pretty good. So I'm assuming that kind of nasty watermark and stuff was the high point of it. So it's sucked out a fairly good amount of water. And it's actually pretty quiet. So essentially, in looking at how this one's kind of set up, you can see this float has to get fairly vertical to trigger. And then there's horizontal, like the one out front that would have shut off by now. So once it gets a little bit downhill is actually when it shuts off. All right, so I've got it sitting in its full-time home. You can kind of see the float's going to be an issue, I think. because it doesn't seem like it's got enough area to really let it kind of get off to the side. And then in that bucket, a lot louder. So now that that's kind of drained down, you can kind of see water's kind of filling in quick. So it'll be interesting to see if this triggers and shuts itself back off, or if I've got to try and figure something else out. Maybe trim the base a little bit on the one side if I can, in order to get it sit down there properly. But so far, seems to be working. So, if you want to find yourself in a situation where all of a sudden your sump pumps aren't working out quite right, it's definitely kind of nice to have a hose around. A Harbor Freight that has a sump pump available, some PVC component stuff, some Teflon tape, and a little bit of ingenuity. And you too can kind of save yourself some hassle and help to mostly get a weird area unflooded. So I don't know if we're going to want to continue to use that one, seeing as it doesn't quite fit fully, but definitely did its job for clearing this out. I've got just this little low spot here left with water, but that's easy enough. The big thing I'm worried about is how much more water is going to be coming in. So what I'll have to do is probably pop back down here, trigger this, let it blow out, maybe scoop whatever more water once we get in the area, and then try and work on modifying how that works. That way that float doesn't rub against the side of the bucket. But really, that bucket's not to the spec for like the enclosure or basin that you're supposed to have. So yeah, the joys of having an old house where some people did some weird stuff in. So hope you guys enjoyed the video. Feel free to like, subscribe, and I'll check you next time.